Now, this story sounds like something out of a James Bond movie. Investigative journalist Amabungani managing partner Sam Soul sensed that his communication devices had been tampered with and that he was being spied on. It applied to him and his colleague and friend Stephanus Bruma. At the time, they were investigating the decision to drop charges against former President Jacob Zuma. Turns out their suspicions were true. When they reported this to the Office of the Inspector General of Intelligence, the response was that whatever was done illegally so. But they beat the state to it. Sam Soul joins us now to tell us more. Good morning, Mr. Soul, and thank you very much for your time. You know, we actually wanted to confine you particularly to the state capture report, the part around or the recommendations around SSA, because you are among those who experienced firsthand what has been found to be the unconstitutional surveillance of individuals by the state. The Chief Justice has found that indeed the operatives were a law unto themselves, arbitrarily deciding on which project to pursue, who to spy on. Give me your take on those recommendations now.
Look, I think this is a very important moment. You know, my case was quite a long time ago, and a very small corner of the big bad picture that Zondo has exposed. But in a way, it was an indication of the genesis of the involvement of the intelligence services in domestic politics, and the way in which the consequences of that are still reverberating today. You know, I was spied upon as part of an investigation based on the so-called Browse Mole report. That spying was part of the spy tapes saga, which was used to withdraw the case against Jacob Zuma, which the state is still trying to prosecute now. And we've seen, you know, from what's come out at Zondo, the enormous damage that the politicization of the intelligence services has caused. But I think it's also in the nature of the beast. They operate in the dark. They operate with black money. And I think we have to be, much more careful about oversight, about transparency, about limiting the extent to which they can operate domestically and in secret.
When we speak of that oversight role, I remember the Deputy Minister David Mahlobo was one person that said, insofar as perhaps a minister's involvement in operations, the law permits them to do such. They believe that then you would have an agency that runs amok. It was intended for them as ministers to somehow insert themselves in the daily operations. But it seems here that the Chief Justice feels that is undesirable. They need to somewhat be independent. If you're going to have ministers that are reshuffled, you're no longer state security minister, then you've got all this privileged information that you have and you can do whatever you want with. What is your take on that?
No, absolutely. The role of the appointed minister in the intelligence legislation is anomalous. It's different to most of the structural situation in terms of other ministries and departments. And we've seen that it's a problem. Minister Mahlobo involved himself in operational matters. He's accused of receiving black cash, and we don't know what he did with it. He allegedly involved himself in manipulating of judges and the judicial system, etc. All of which, is completely contrary to the way in which our democratic state is supposed to operate.
And then, you, having been somebody who interacted with the Inspector General of Intelligence, and you were given that, by the way, type of an answer to say whatever was done would have been done legally. There's been a recommendation this time around that it needs to be strengthened. Its independence must seriously be taken into account, because we've seen what happened with Tamaruddin, where he said when he started to investigate Arthur Fraser, then his vetting was removed. He was somebody that now could no longer operate in that space.
That's right, and the Inspector General is dependent on the SSA in the current setup for its budget, for much of its staffing, for all kinds of support. So it's in a way structurally a captured institution, and in a way the same applies to the oversight body, the Joint Standing Committee on Intelligence. It has really not covered itself in glory in the way in which it has been overly deferent to the intelligence services, has not held them to account, has not forced things that needed to be forced into the open, has not done that.
You know, when we watch the proceedings around, or at least testimony around state security and some of these covert operations, there was a conversation in certain quarters that perhaps this shouldn't be happening in the manner in which it is, where it's in the public and we're getting to hear the testimony. I remember even Minister Dlotlo at the time was a bit apprehensive or uncomfortable with having some of those within the State Security Agency coming out to testify. What has been your view around this kind of conversation where some are saying it leaves the country vulnerable? We're becoming a banana republic if we don't appreciate that state security needs to be something that is not aired out publicly. Whatever the operations, it needs to happen in a more private space. Either it should have been in camera where some of them give their testimony, but not something that you and I could ordinarily access.
No, I think we have moved towards being a banana republic because the spies were allowed to get away with murder, essentially, under cover of secrecy. In my view, there is relatively little, a relatively small area of operations that needs to happen, under cloak of secrecy. And secrecy should never be, and I think this is a point that Zondo made and others have made, including the Inspector General, that secrecy should never be a cloak for criminality, and that's what it was used for in this case. So I'm a great believer in maximum transparency. Obviously, there are areas in which it's going to interfere with the legitimate, necessary service that intelligence services provide. But those areas are quite limited, and then we need to make sure that there is genuine, independent oversight of those areas, so that this kind of thing doesn't happen.
And then overall, what is your feeling? 4 years later, we finally have concluded. The handover happened, and now we have the final installment of the state capture report. As an investigative journalist, I mean, most of what we heard in the inquiry was what the media had already publicized. I mean, most of it was as a result of the media's unrelenting coverage of some of these instances of state capture. How do you feel?
Look, I think indeed, I think South Africa and South Africans should be very grateful for the media they have and had. I think the media did its job in blowing the whistle, in waving red flags long before the commission. It's a pity that the powers that be, the politicians, etc., did not take note, resisted listening to the message that the media was putting out, that there is something seriously wrong here. I think the hard work is still to come. The media can't prosecute people. I think there is a little bit of disappointment, given the powers that Zondo had, that not more progress is visible in terms of his report, in terms of getting evidence that is sufficient to start to put people in jail. But that is the role of the police and the National Prosecuting Authority. I think there are real questions as to whether they are up to that. But I think there really needs to be a maximum effort now, not to lose this opportunity to insert some accountability into our politics, into the way our nation functions, because we desperately need that.
Your take on the current president's role, because the report was also quite critical of his strategic approach to some of the state capture, that if there was possibly an opportunity to stop it dead on its tracks, he was somebody that opted to be more silent or be circumspect in how he handled some of the issues that perhaps he saw were going wrong.
I think that's a valid criticism. And I think given the revelations that have come out around the Phala Phala farm, we have to question to what extent the president was compromised, perhaps by his own intelligence services, and that perhaps that was part of the reason for his hesitance to come out. We know that Arthur Fraser, in his attempt to put evidence before the commission, made demands on the SSA for the release and declassification of a whole lot of internal reports, including President Cyril Ramaphosa's own file, which is held at the SSA. We obviously don't know what's in that, but there was obviously an implied threat in that. And I think this goes, again, to demonstrate the very baleful influence that the intelligence services have had on our politics.
So would you then say the recommendation that perhaps citizens need to choose their president would be a well-founded recommendation, that perhaps ordinary citizens should not be beholden to the whims of a political party, that if they decide today it's this person who must succeed so-and-so, that becomes the person who becomes our president?
Look, I think that recommendation has far-reaching consequences. Our whole constitutional structure is set up slightly differently. I think we are moving in terms of the changes that will allow individuals to contest national and provincial positions. We're moving to some extent in that direction, where there's some individual accountability. But I think it's a delicate balance, and I think there needs to be proper debate. It's an interesting suggestion coming from the Zono Commission. I think it smacks a little bit of desperation, but I think we need to have this debate, because at the moment our system is not serving us well.
Samso, thank you very much. What excellent work you do there for Amapungane. Thank you very much for taking time out of your busy day investigating serious matters of